sure. Okay, wait. 1 minute timer.
Okay, I think we are live now. Hello, everybody. My name is Saeed. I'm the founder and CEO of Next Stars and Funds Farm. I'm super happy and proud today to be with two esteemed panelists, Adrian Smith and Michael Cobran. And we are going to talk about, the title of the event is Rolling Out the Red Carpet, Building Sustainable Support Systems for Newcomer Innovators in Canada. Let's just as Edwin's trying to set up the camera. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, very good. So I'll do a little bit of an intro. So about myself and then a little bit about the two speakers, and I'll let them to explain further. I'm a Canadian immigrant entrepreneur. I'm deeply passionate about supporting entrepreneurs and building a semiconductor for Canadian future where immigrant entrepreneurs are a part of. The goal of Venture 360 events is to really create a dialogue between different stakeholders, and the hope is to suggest and provide practical suggestions to some of the challenges that we are facing in terms of supporting entrepreneurs, whether local or immigrant entrepreneurs, but particularly immigrant and newcomer innovators. So today I am joined, as I mentioned, with Adrian Smith. I know Adrian, we met in 2019, first time. We've been disconnected for a while, but super happy to be reconnected with her. She is an immigration lawyer and also an adjunct professor at Queen University. So Adrian, if you can talk a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Michael.
Yeah, so thank you, Saeed. I'm really pleased to be here today. So thank you for the invitation, and also pleased to be here with Michael. So I have been practicing exclusively in immigration law for just over a decade now, and really started my pathway to being interested in immigration as a student at McGill University and volunteering with the Canadian Council for Refugees. And after that experience, then proceeded to do my master's in immigration studies at TMU, and then went on to work at the IRCC for 3 years as a policy advisor. And I think it was at the IRCC where I really got a sense about how the government was trying to really good-heartedly trying to create policies that were going to support immigrants, especially in their resettlement side. So after they qualify for immigration to Canada, how are they actually supported and making sure that they succeed when they get here? So I really kind of got an inside track to how those policies were made. And then went to law school, really wanted to do immigration law. I'm sure for the same reason that Michael and Saeed are interested in this area. It's an incredibly fulfilling area to work in. It's very dynamic. There's so much happening within the space all the time. And it really is, I think, the future of our country to make sure that we're lifting everybody up to make sure everyone succeeds. So thank you again. I'm really happy to be here.
I do appreciate your time. I can't wait to learn from your invaluable experience and insights, and also share. Thank you for sharing that with the audience. I know that you're deeply passionate about building an inclusive Canadian society. I know that you're deeply passionate about the future of the country, and the fact that you've worked also on the policy side, I think gives you a very unique perspective on this topic. And we'll move to Michael. I know Michael for a long time. We had a mutual friend, and we've hung out a lot, and we've talked about different issues. He's a very unique character as well. Like was a former financier and shifted gear and is doing something like that he's like deeply passionate about. And I'll let Michael, you two explain about yourself, and but I think also your perspective as an enabler is greatly important for today's topic.
Great. Thanks, Saeed, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here today talking about something that I'm very passionate about. I'm the founder of an organization, a learning and coaching organization called Creative. And our mission is to essentially empower human potential through learning, coaching, and community. And I spend a lot of my time working in those three pillars. And I'm particularly passionate about increasing access to career development programs, especially with the newcomer and underserved communities. And I think a lot of us, if we think back to our careers, can imagine if we had received the support and the coaching and the mentorship earlier in our careers, how different might our careers look. The other hat I wear is I'm also an instructor and the head career coach in the Intercultural Skills Lab at the Rotman School of Management at U of T. And the Intercultural Skills Lab offers a series of programs, the leadership and career advancement programs for internationally trained immigrants. So over the past 6 years, I've worked with sort of hundreds of newcomers from a coaching perspective and from a career advancement perspective. And it's really given me some unique insights into some of the challenges that newcomers face. And in many ways, sometimes how a lot of other programs and services have failed newcomers when we bring them into the country. So that is, the lens with which I'll be thinking through and reflecting and commenting on today, and really excited to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Michael. I myself, I've had also a little bit of a unique career journey, starting as an engineer, working a little bit in finance, and then kind of embarking on a journey in a startup for mental health. I myself have had conversations and discussions with you, Michael, time and time and again, as I was kind of in those trenches trying to figure out my purpose and what I want to do with my career. So like this gives me also an opportunity to reflect on those opportunities, and thank you. And then I know you have a very, very unique perspective, because you're also passionate about how to enable newcomers in Canada and really like help them to achieve their potential and basically build the life that they always wanted to. So a little bit of a housekeeping note. If anyone has a question, they can put it down in the comment section. We'll definitely review those questions at the end of the session, and I will ask those questions to the speakers. And today, I also wanted to thank Cestar College, as we're at Cestar. Next Starts is basically is running the Entrepreneurship Center here. We're very proud of collaborating with the university, with the college here, and this event is also available to students that are in the college, and we are super happy and proud for the relationship. I just wanted to also mention that. So without further ado, we can start the questions. Then the first question that I have for both panelists is, what are the different reasons that innovator newcomers choose Canada to start their businesses? I wanted to add a little bit of a context here as a newcomer innovator. I think there is a lot of positive aspects to Canada. It's always been a destination for the most ambitious around the world. The maybe the point to worry about a little bit is that other countries are really catching up. So now innovators from all over the world now have multiple options. And one of the goals actually of today's session is how can Canada as a country stay ahead in the race and really try to create that like solid bedrock for these innovators as they before they arrive to Canada and also after they arrive to Canada. So with that context, if the speakers can please chime in on this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's an interesting question, and I think an interesting point that you raised, Saeed, with looking at what other countries are doing and how they're attracting immigrants to come to their country. Because, when I was at IRCC, the comparative analysis with what was happening in other countries was always front and center with the policy work that we did. So when Canada was trying to encourage people to immigrate and developing programs, it was constantly looking at what is Australia doing, what is the UK doing, what is the United States doing. And I think out of those international comparisons, that's actually really where our new express entry point system came from. Because the timing that it used to take to immigrate to Canada under the economic category, the federal skilled worker category, it would sometimes take upwards of 3 to 5 years from the time that you apply until the time you get your permanent residence. And the current processing time under express entry is usually between 6 to 8 months. So I think there is interest in the government to process people quickly and to make sure that the reasons why they're coming to Canada, which is often to start a business and contribute to the economy and have a family here and benefit from all of the, the education system within Canada, those things can't happen unless they happen quickly. Because people obviously have life goals that they want to achieve. So I think, going back to your question about the different reasons why people come to Canada, I think it's always a multitude of factors. And I think, but what I hear directly from my clients often is the stability of the economy itself. And I think the diversity within you can switch your career. So a lot of my clients may have, let's say, an engineering background or a finance background, but then they come here and they maybe want to work in the tech sector or the education sector. So I think that is a comment that I hear from my clients time and time again, that they have the opportunity to really just use their skills to the best advantage within the Canadian economy.
Yes, thanks for sharing some of those, information. I think, like, when I also talk to entrepreneurs from all over the world, and they one of the reasons that they like Canada is the stability, but also if you think about it, Canada is actually positioned very well to become a hub for international and global business because we have different communities in every city. So if, like, for example, if I have a product that I want to sell to Asia, to Africa, I have access to the the market in a sense. It's such a multicultural. That's like an aspect that I think it's somewhat it's very important as when we are thinking of Canada as a launch pad for global business. So, Michael, what do you think are the reasons contributing to that decision making?
Yeah, so I definitely think it's, some of the similar things that both you and Adrian have mentioned. I think there's a sense of stability, security. I think that sort of personal safety aspect is really important. And I think, hearing success stories from people they've known, immigrants who have moved to Canada and sort of been successful in businesses, I think a lot of that sort of buoys that sort of interest in moving to Canada. The other thing I think that's important to remember is, Canada's standing in the world from an innovation perspective is dropping. And I think it was the Conference Board of Canada had a scorecard where Canada was placed 15 out of 20 countries on that list. And I think what I'm starting to see more of, which I didn't see before the pandemic, is a lot of clients who are talking about moving to the US. And I think some people are using, moving to Canada, it's the entryway into North America and perhaps as a launch pad to the US as well. So I don't know yet if we have sort of statistics around this, but it is a trend that I'm starting to see where people are moving to Canada with a lot of these sort of hopes and dreams around entrepreneurship, but are recognizing or realizing that perhaps Canada is a bit more risk averse, perhaps a bit more conservative in its business practices than they'd expect. And I think sometimes people think we're a bit of sort of the US light and realize that sort of the culture here is quite different. So I think sometimes there is a bit of that, difference between the perception that brings people here and then sort of some of the realities that they see once they're on the ground, trying to find opportunities here.
I'll ask Adrian to chime in and add maybe some stats that she has. But anecdotally, it's just somebody, I think I read on Twitter or X that the processing time for a visa to the States from Canada is 8 months. So that shows that a lot of people are applying, and maybe this is also something that like I credit to whoever that posted that tweet. But yeah, it looks like that a lot of people are thinking of Canada as a launchpad. And it's one of the areas, one of the pillars that we at NextSource we really believe in, and we try to communicate is for a Canadian business to access to the U.S. market, they don't necessarily need to relocate. Of course, we have so much challenges, in Canada to build an innovative business, whether it's from a sales perspective, marketing, small market, lack of capital. But we have some really good trade deals, in place for Canadian companies that can, access international markets remaining a Canadian entity. But that's we can get into so much detail on that. So Adrian, what any thoughts on what Michael shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael's really hit the nail on the head that Canadian immigration intake really benefits from the fact that the United States remains extraordinarily difficult to get to the final stages of both citizenship and getting a green card. And, their most common work visa program, which is the H-1B work permit program, is really just so limited, and you have to show this really specialized skill in order to get this work permit, and you're often on that work permit for many years before you even get into a lottery to qualify for a green card. So the complexity and length of time that it takes to get that most secure form of immigration status, which is citizenship, is so much shorter in Canada often than it is in the United States. So I think Michael's right that we're often just, US light, that it's faster to come to Canada. It's, similar in a lot of ways. But I would be very interested to hear a survey of people who are interested in immigrating to Canada or the United States, that if all things were equal and they had the choice, where would they go? So, to be entirely dependent on another country's immigration policies, I think is a very risky position to be in.
Yeah, unfortunately, unfortunately, the people have the perception. But as Michael mentioned, I think one of the important factors is really the difference between the expectation and realities on the ground. So, which kind of is a good segue to our next question. What are the challenges innovative newcomer faces in qualifying to relocate to Canada? I think Adrian, we can start first, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the last probably 2 years or so, I think we've seen a lot of challenges that immigrants haven't faced for many years. And I think if I even look at the changes that were announced yesterday to the temporary foreign worker program, which essentially has new limitations on how many temporary foreign workers the government will allow an employer to hire. It has to be under 10%. New caps on labor market impact assessments if in that area there's a higher unemployment rate than 6%. So you're seeing with the government's announcement yesterday that there is a real rollback to encouraging temporary residents to come to Canada and eventually seek a pathway to permanent residency. We've seen it earlier this year with international students really being seen as a scapegoat for a housing crisis, which has been decades in the making. And unfortunately, international students and temporary foreign workers have really taken the political fall for, I think, what is, essentially a government policy issue rather than an immigration issue. So those are the, I think, unique challenges that immigrant innovators are facing right now. Is for the first time in the last 20 years, there's actually been a decrease in public support for immigration. So with that, you will see maybe potentially the unwillingness of the government to invest in supports and programs and grants and all the things that small business owners, particularly immigrant small business owners, may have been able to take advantage of in the past. Whether those supports existed in the past is, a discussion we'll have later on, but I think that is the kind of unique space that immigrants are facing right now when they're looking at relocating to Canada.
That's very true. I watched a report on Guardian uh, about the Canadian public sentiment on immigration. Turns out that 60% of the public right now is against immigration, which to me, as you mentioned, it's the right word, the scapegoat. Definitely, like we can't deny there has been some problems with the immigration programs, and of course, no system is perfect. But coming down with a sledgehammer on some of these, programs, um, it might not be the best decision in the long run, as other countries are really trying to step up and attract the talented and ambitious from all over the world. So, Michael, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, a couple of things to add. I think obviously immigration always becomes a political issue. And, sometimes rather than focusing on how programs are managed, we sometimes have these, we just have to sort of cut back. But I think there's a lot of research that really supports the impact that immigrant entrepreneurs have on entrepreneurship and on innovation and productivity, increasing innovation and productivity. I think even there's been a lot of research in the US. There's, a positive causal relationship. When we have more immigrants, we see sort of, the impact on business. We see higher rates of ownership of intellectual property in immigrant-owned businesses. So I think a lot of that sometimes gets lost when we're having these discussions, but I think sometimes we really do need to look at some of the research that really supports the impact and the positive impact that immigrant-owned businesses have on the Canadian economy. And especially now at a time when we need that innovation and we have some of these programs sort of potentially being scaled back, again, we have to ask ourselves, well, how is that going to increase our standing in the world? And, we look at 15 out of 20 countries, how does immigration fit into that strategy to move us a few steps, up?
I'm going to also share a stats. A few weeks ago, I attended the Venture Day for Next Canada. I'm proud supporter and also an advisor with Next. And Reza, who is one of the co-founders of Next Canada, shared a very interesting perspective and insight. And look, he mentioned that government has announced that they're supporting AI initiatives to the tune of $2 billion, which sounds like a big number. Wow, $2 billion. But when you look at it, only one startup got 4 billion of investment from Amazon last year. So a lot is happening on the innovation front, particularly with the development of AI and new technologies. And one good way of shortcutting or like basically power jumping is to bring the people that are already equipped with the ideas, with the skill set, to launch innovative businesses and really support them to uh, basically scale some of the businesses, some of the products that maybe have been even tested a little bit in other markets in Canada. So I can share because I'm a little bit involved with the Startup Visa program. Like that also have been like, is a very good example of program that's like hypothetically be an amazing program. Well, had some technical difficulties, obviously, and but also has been rolled back because of those technical difficulties, and it's been made really challenging, with all the limitations and also like it's the vague expectations that I think like it's not really unclear to the entrepreneur how the program really is going like measured and like how the goalpost is going to be moved basically, and things take forever. And like time is very important for relocating businesses because there's always a timing to market. For example, if you had a digital health company, like we had Canada's first virtual health platform. Before COVID, it was a matter of leisure, a matter of convenience. After COVID, it was a matter of necessity. Before COVID, we were begging insurance companies to approve a virtual visit. But after COVID, even the government, policy supported some virtual telemedicine, like tech-enabled delivery of care with billing codes. So startups, like something that was deemed innovative in 2016, everyone's like, wow, can you do that? Now, like practically can be built with Chat GPT and maybe like a couple of APIs in a matter of 3 weeks. So it's very important, the element of time when we're looking at these programs, particularly for innovator newcomers. Anything else that you guys want to add? Otherwise, we can move to the next question.
Yeah, actually, just the only other thing, as you sort of touched on AI, which is important, is I think there's a lot of fear out there around, AI taking jobs. And I think that also feeds into when you have people who are worried about the jobs, just sort of the perception of immigration as well. People become, things become sort of very closely held. So I think together with, programs on immigration, we also have to make sure that we're addressing those programs around reskilling and people who are at higher risk of losing jobs as a result of AI automation, machine learning. So, anytime we look at these things, and even today we're talking about immigration, but it's one thing of many in the ecosystem. But to me, that's sort of another really important piece that we have to factor in as well, and really look at, what programs are we building and developing at scale to address, people who are most at risk of losing their jobs as a result of a lot of these factors.
I think that's really interesting, Michael. Sorry, just to add on to what you're saying, because I think, this potential stagnation or realized stagnation that's happening right now in the labor market is dictating kind of knee-jerk reactions right now, which are changing immigration policy fundamentally. But then, and it's so focused very much on temporary residents and temporary workers. But I think just to kind of end this part of our discussion on a positive note, if you actually look at the levels planning that the government releases every year for how many immigrants they're taking into Canada, including entrepreneurs and immigrant innovators, the numbers are projected to increase. So I think, the kind of brand Canada of being a destination for immigration, as much as we're raising all these concerns, I think that brand is very much intact. And I think that the government has committed, let's say next year, to welcoming 500,000 immigrants. Now, how they divide up those numbers changes. And we can see that huge reduction in temporary residents for exactly what Michael mentioned. But I think it's also just important to, reiterate that the government overall is still focusing on permanent immigration. I think that's much more their focus, so that there's a little bit longer term policy planning rather than this short term knee-jerk reactive planning.
Thank you. Yes, I think what's at the end of the day important is to understand, like, how policy can shape behavior in people. I definitely agree that Canadian brand is still very much intact. Uh, Even us at Nextars with our advisors, we even are talking about how can we even market a Canadian entrepreneurship brand and kind of separate that with the American way of building business, which is only focused on revenue. We are a lot more about inclusion, sustainability, involving teamwork, community, rather than competition. And I think that's kind of the sentiment that we have to build, because we have to like look after each other a little bit and support each other and help each other to broaden that umbrella for Canadian entrepreneurship. So thank you so much for that. Um, the next question I have is, what are the challenges an innovator newcomer faces after they relocate to Canada? Oh, that's a big one.
So I can. Oh, go ahead, Adrian.
No, go ahead, Michael.
So, I mean, I think that there's so many. This, can sometimes be quite a long list, and I think it's important to separate. I think there's certain things that every newcomer, challenges that every newcomer faces, and then there are those that are sort of specific to innovators and entrepreneurs. I think, when people come, and I even remember moving to Canada, 30 years ago, I was fortunate to come with my immediate family. But I think, one of the challenges first is just that sense of community and connection. And I see it time and time again, in the program that I'm involved in at Rotman, I see at the end, we do the celebration circle at the end of the program, and all the comments come from, people felt alone when they first moved. They felt that they were the only ones sort of going through this. They started to doubt their abilities. They lost their confidence. And I think having that support network and that sense of community is really important. And, we need to focus a lot more on that, and then have programs around that. The other challenge, and this is interesting, I have sort of a view on this. It's just this idea of advice giving. So many people sort of come to Canada, they've got advice before they've come here. Then they come here, and people sometimes are steering people in the wrong directions. I had a client recently who said, well, someone told me to take my MBA or my post-secondary education, to scale it down, and it will be easier to find a job. So I think people are getting sort of conflicting messaging, and sometimes, making these important life-changing career decisions based on what I often say, a sample size of one. So, I think a lot of that is sort of very much around the support network. I think this idea of understanding Canadian workplace culture can sometimes be a challenge. So I think programs around teaching intercultural skills is really sort of very much a prerequisite. And I think also we need to talk more about values. And what I find often is a lot of people come and have these sort of long-held values around, not asking for help or independence, or even sort of humility that I often see. This idea of, I can't promote myself, or, increase my visibility because it's bragging. So I think, people often sort of find some of these where there's sometimes just not necessarily an understanding of the workplace culture, but sometimes it's just how do I be true to my values, but really show up in an authentic way? I think on the entrepreneurship side, we have sort of a lot of challenges, just access to entrepreneurship programs in general. I think a lot of the settlement agencies are now focusing on building entrepreneurship programs, but I'm not sure if we have as many programs that are specifically focused on entrepreneurs. And I think quite often there's also this issue that we have quite often, settlement agencies, many of them are focused on getting and finding employment for people. So sometimes, we're steering people on the employment side, encouraging them to take the first job they find, but we aren't necessarily really helping those people have a passion for entrepreneurship and getting connected as well. So I think, from what I'm seeing, I see that as some of the challenges. I think also people often say that a lot of new immigrants move into entrepreneurship as a last resort. I think there are some people who go into entrepreneurship because they've had trouble finding jobs through traditional means. But I see sort of with a lot of my clients where they're in jobs, but their long-term plan involves an entrepreneurship role, starting a business, and more importantly, sort of giving back to the community as well. So I know, Saeed, you spoke about just this idea of social impact. I'm amazed at, when I see so many clients, the businesses that they're hoping to start all come back to, many of them come back to supporting the community, supporting underserved communities, programs around, building businesses that are focused on sustainability consulting. So I think I really loved your comment just about building that Canadian entrepreneurship brand that perhaps focuses a lot more on sort of social entrepreneurship as well. So I know I probably went on a few different tangents there, but those are some of the things I'm seeing, some of the challenges, and I think sort of some solutions as well.
Well, I do appreciate it. And what I love about today's conversation and the two esteemed panelists is that some of the insights are really like practical and from lived experience, or like dealt like issues that the real people are actually facing, and that you two are aware of. And it's just, it adds so much you know, authenticity to the conversation. I do appreciate that. So you mentioned some really, really interesting points. I think like definitely bad advice is like, I think like very, very, very important issue before entrepreneurs come to Canada, and even after they arrive in Canada. So I'm not sure how to deal with that because there's a lot of incentives, and it's very hard to educate people en masse and like redirect them to the right resources. But that's definitely a big, big issue that I myself have dealt with a little bit when I arrived in Canada. So Adrian, please.
Yeah, so you and I picked up on the same comment that Michael made, and I think it's what I see every day in my practice, and I'm always kind of working against, which is the bad advice that people get on how their friends succeeded here, how their family succeeded here, how they got a job, how they started their business. And I'm also very sympathetic to wanting to listen to your community's advice, because those are the individuals that had the closest pathway to what you want to achieve. So of course, if I was in the same position, I would probably be listening to my sister and my cousin and the individual at my, church or mosque or temple. So, I'm very sympathetic to that advice being, having such an impact on my clients. But I generally do see a lot of that advice either just not holding up for that particular client and that individual. And I think that's when, if you're an immigrant entrepreneur and you're looking to build your business within Canada, the way that I see my clients that start really unique businesses is so much of it is based on their individual brand, their unique abilities, their unique passions and unique interests. So why you would look to someone else for what they have done in business, I think doesn't really make sense if you actually want to succeed in this area. Like you said, it's gotta be authentic to you. It has to be something that you really care about. And I think that's very individual. But the pull of community and family advice is very strong. On that point, I think one thing I also see is a lot of misinformation just about how people obtained their immigration status or their student visa or their permanent residency, because immigration policies and how visas are issued change overnight within the Canadian immigration system. So even for a client that last year I prepared their permanent resident application in a particular way, I may not be preparing it the same way just 1 year later, because they're a completely different set of considerations or a different political environment or, a different change that that may have worked for someone a year ago and doesn't work this year. So I think that that is also a real challenge for people when they're coming to Canada, is just to stay true to themselves and get advice from a source that they trust and that's credible.
Um, well, I think as you mentioned, like I also am sympathetic because like it makes sense for people to kind of tap into those resources, but I think is sometimes um, maybe like more harmful is deliberate bad advice, like by
Mhm.
incentives, like as sometimes an incentive is structure to redirect people in the wrong direction. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
that also a lot of times adds to some of the challenges that we have with these programs. There go the sledgehammer that comes down on these programs. I think one aspect, one unique challenge that like immigrant innovators face in Canada, which also is still very true for Canadian uh, entrepreneurs, is access to capital, but particularly for newcomer innovators, because there's no credit history on them. Often they're having a hard time, communicating their business, with the bank, and because of like maybe English is not their first language, they do not know anybody. They were this big, factory owner or small business owner in their own country or startup founder. Now they're in a new country. They almost like imagine a glass ceiling for themselves. Oh, I can't do that. I can't start a business. I have to go work like for a few years in a company and then start a business. But a big factor is access to capital. Also on equity deals, financing for startups, for even like for small businesses, but also for debt equity, debt financing. The banks, BDC. There are some programs that are designed. But I think this is also something that policy can really create an incentive structure around, because at the end of the day, the fuel for an economic development vehicle is capital. So, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's absolutely a huge issue, particularly when you're in your first few years of business, that you need to have access, potentially to capital or even a business line of credit. And I think this is where, you know, a representative at the bank and your connections and your networks can really make a huge difference. Even actually, I was speaking with my parents last week, and they started a small grocery store in a small town in Canada, and had such a difficult time securing any sort of capital to start their business. Eventually grew the business into almost 50 employees, had 40 years of a successful business. But they were saying that the only reason they were able to succeed is because the bank manager just believed in their business. And I think, if you're immigrating to a new country and you don't have those networks or those connections or those individuals that are willing to really go to bat for your business, um, then it's incredibly difficult. It's difficult even if you have the network and the support. So um, I think there's a lot of changes that could be made, particularly to policies at banks, just to really help prop people up, especially in their first couple years of business. Understanding, it's a long game, right?
Absolutely, and like I like the silver lining in the story that immigrant built a business with 50 employees. So, and that's the beauty of supporting uh, newcomer innovators, because with immigration, inevitably there is some challenges. Like someone who decides to relocate to a new country and with their family, it's a very tough decision. So they're already, a little bit ambitious, a little bit, risk taker, and they have so much unique experience that it's a different life experience in different parts of the world, and they're bringing all that in there, like, and that's the human capital that's coming, with that idea, with that grit, and
Mhm.
it's yeah. So like that's Michael shared some of the stats. I think Michael, if you have something to add, please.
Yeah, no, I think that relationship building is really key, and I think that goes both for entrepreneurs as well as people looking for jobs. And I've seen stats as high as 70 to 80% of jobs are placed through what we call sort of the hidden job market. So I think this focus on building relationships is really important. Adrian's idea or comment just around how we fund and the requirements we look. I think also there's so many unconscious biases that come into that process too, that we have to recognize. I also think what are the opportunities for micro lending companies and other alternative crowdfunding? Are there other opportunities to support funding of these immigrant entrepreneurship ventures as well? But the relationship piece, I do find, I spent my career before I became a coach in the real estate and sort of pension fund world, and so much of the investment environment is so closely held. We also often joke with our clients, we say it's not who you know, it's who knows you and what they know about you, to really sort of put it on you to, make sure you're getting out there. But I think this idea of relationship building is so important. And we need to look at, what are the mentorship programs we have out there. The other thing, just, on the comment on advice earlier, I think there's really a room for coaching, where you have someone who's going to help you think through a lot of these things. A lot of people, I find clients, have come here and their whole career up until now has been dictated by parents or, whoever's been funding their education. And now for the first time, they have time to really sort of think about what they want. So I think that there's definitely a room for having more coaching programs where people can figure out, is entrepreneurship even for me? I have this idea of what entrepreneurship is. How can I get the information from people who have lived experience in this? Is really important as well, because again, it's that sort of perception versus reality, which I think any founder, experiences, but I think so much more when, you've come from another country.
That's beautiful. I kind of want to run a small teaser for folks on LinkedIn. We are going to, myself and our advisor, Rick Spence, we're going to have a session in September actually on validating your startup idea. It's going to be again broadcasted on LinkedIn. So if you have an idea that you're thinking, always think, oh, should I move forward with it? Besides coaching for your interpersonal, skill development, also, I invite you to join that session. And we have a methodology on assessing, is an idea, a viable business idea for a startup.
What day is that?
September 19th. Yes, September 19th. And another kind of little detail, right? I read a paper. It was suggested to me by a dear, not a friend, but someone that I know, I look up to, and it's called the Strength of Weak Ties. It's written by a sociologist out of Stanford in 1967, and it's basically they studied a group of people that wanted to find a job. They found out that the best relationships that you have are not the ones that you're very close with, because you tend to have the similar ideas, you tend to have similar networks, and kind of it runs out very soon. The most important relationships in terms of finding a job, you can be finding an opportunity, finding capital, are the people that you're casually in touch with. So that you meet maybe once or twice a year, but there's maybe some mutual friend that adds an element of trust. Anyways, I recommend that. It's a paper I recommended to everyone. It took me a week to read. They're kind of complicated with a lot of mathematics, but it's it's worthwhile. So next question is which kind of segue to the discussions we had. How can Canada use its skilled and experienced newcomers to advance our economy?
I mean, I think that the policy that Canada is using now is basically to offload what is needed within the Canadian labor economy to the provinces. Like we have seen in the last 2 years, a huge policy shift to selecting immigrants, primarily based on something called the provincial nominee program. which basically allows each province to have more of a responsive immigration program to set in-demand occupations, for example, in healthcare, construction in Ontario, or in the tech sector in Alberta, or caregivers in BC. So the way that Canada, I think, is using this kind of skills and experience that people are bringing to Canada right now is really to say, this is the individual economies that exist within each province, and this is how your skills are going to be best used. Now, obviously, you have to show that you have an intention to live in that province, but I think what is really interesting is under the Canadian Charter, there's a right of protecting mobility rights. So that being said, if you relocate to Alberta, it turns out, your skills and experience aren't being best used in that economy, and you want to immigrate to BC or Ontario, then nothing ties you to staying there. So I think, the idea is that people's skills and experience are best used in advancing the economy when it's reactive to, or there's immigration programs that are really reactive and nuanced to what each labor market needs. Whether that's what actually happens, I think, is a whole other conversation, but that's from I think, a policy perspective, what's happening currently. If we look at the figures themselves, it's about almost more than 1 in every 5 people that are being granted permanent residency next year are going to be selected through the provincial nominee process. So this has been a huge shift in government policy just in the last few years.
Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we, this idea that it's really important that whatever programs to best utilize the immigrant talent, a lot of things need to be tied to sort of what the employers need and what the current needs are within the different markets. But I think there's also sort of a long-term strategy piece that I think is missing a bit. So, I think we need to look at what is our long-term innovation agenda? What are the areas we really need to grow in? Where are we, or where do we anticipate seeing the most growth? And then building a lot of these sort of programs around that, because there's so much talent, across the world where we can sort of hire and bring in, specifically to address some of these needs. The other challenge too that I think is really sort of important to sort of leverage a lot of newcomer talent as well. Working in small and medium enterprises is really key, because quite often, it's a great segue for people who want to become entrepreneurs. Spending time in smaller organizations, seeing some of the challenges can be a great learning opportunity. But it's been shown that small and medium enterprises, I think, 60% of SMEs had less than 10% of their labor was immigrant labor. So I think there's sort of a whole other piece and strategy. I think we really need to look at what's happening in small and medium enterprises. I think we also need to look at what are from an employer perspective, to tap into a lot of these grant programs, to tap into a lot of these talent programs. Some of them are just so onerous that especially, SMEs who don't have a lot of time to commit aren't getting involved in. So I think we need to look at, what are the programs? How are the programs aligned to a long-term innovation strategy? And then what are we doing to make it easier for the employers as well to sort of increase access? And then also, what are we doing just from an entrepreneurship program? How are we increasing access to entrepreneurship programs, to incubators, to accelerators as well?
I think both of you shared some very, very interesting points. What Michael, you mentioned, made me think of the job that I had before my startup. So working at a company, it was oil and gas, but downstream. And because of that, I traveled a lot, more than many other Canadians. I've been to like small cities that you wouldn't go otherwise, unless you have a project or a work reason to go to. And we have such a diverse country, and of course, if we have like a grand scheme, a larger innovation strategy, I agree with Adrian that it has to have a flavor of each province. Like for example, if you're in energy, it would just make sense for you to be in Alberta. There's so many new industries that are happening there, but you're closer to the customer. Often you may run into a customer in a bar or in a cafe, and if you're like doing something, for example, that enables fisheries, you might want to be, you know, in Atlantic or whatnot. So, and there's so much opportunities in these different places, and this is something that I always often like also get a little bit tilted opinion. Like, of course, you can't force people, and that we have the right for mobility. That makes total sense. But also, like people are, and also people are drawn to their communities. And but at the same time, if there are actual like proper policies, incentives, you know, that enable on immigrant innovators or newcomer innovators to do businesses, maybe whether it's like in tax policy or investment policy or some sort of a subsidy or enablement from the government, then you know you might be in a very different situation, because at the end of the day these are business people and they want to create successful businesses, and that's how they make their decisions. And small sentence, I like definitely I value the work that I did at that company. I always Dennis was my boss, the owner of that company, always remains my all-time favorite entrepreneur. I learned so much from him. And yeah, and I'm forever thankful to him. So definitely, I think it's a good idea for newcomers to work in an SME. And it was a smaller company. It gave me so much opportunity, and I made so many mistakes, but I learned so much, and we made a lot of money together. So it was really good. And the next question is, what is stopping newcomers from contributing to the Canadian economy? I'm also mindful of time. We have 4 minutes left. If I can ask the speakers for another 10 minutes, so you can go until 1:10. Can we do that, please?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Because I have a very important question from the audience as well that they want to ask. But yeah, so what is stopping newcomers from contributing to the Canadian economy?
I mean, when I was thinking about this, again, like it's such a big question, but I think if we look at like recent reports, one report which the government is very clear that they've been considering it when they make policies, it's a report from RBC that initially was tying international students to the problems in the housing market. But there was a lot of other kind of tidbits in that report, which was essentially the takeaway is, you know, arguing, like Michael said, for a more of a planned approach and what are the long-term goals with innovation and immigration. But I think one tidbit from that report is that RBC is projecting as of last year that half of all jobs aren't requiring a post-secondary education. So with the way that our point system is set up currently, obviously level of education is heavily weighted under the Express Entry Economic Program. And then you have that age-old issue, which we've all heard about, with highly educated immigrants coming to Canada and not being able to contribute to the Canadian economy. And I think that's where, like both of you mentioned, there's this kind of mismatch between the immigration selection programs and the jobs that are currently available, which don't require post-secondary education. This is an age-old discussion that's been happening, you know, since I've been in the immigration space for over 10 years. But I think that, you know, when we talk about the resilience and grit that people have with even making the decision to move to Canada, I think it's also just understanding and making sure people are equipped with the information about how to retrain, reskill, adapt, and be flexible to make sure that they have the tools they need to enter the Canadian economy with the massive skills that they're bringing that aren't necessarily a hard skill that they've learned from their education or work experience back home, but so many other incredible decision making and cultural skills and all of these amazing skills that Canadian companies can use and really elevate, you know, to help them enter the Canadian economy faster and at a higher level.
Michael?
Yeah, I think when we think of sort of some of the barriers and things that are stopping newcomers. I think there's sort of all the external pieces. Obviously, sometimes, sort of labor market changes, even what we're seeing now, where I see clients who are doing all the right things who are still struggling, sort of finding roles. But I think there's also sort of a big internal component. And I know, Adrian, you touched on this idea of transferable skills, but I think sometimes what's stopping people is having the tools to be able to tell their story, having the tools to unpack their experiences and be able to really showcase their skills. Sometimes it's even overcoming some of those values that they've had sort of their whole life that have prevented them from sort of speaking up and advocating for themselves. So I'm sort of a bit biased in that, I work, on the career development side, but I think sometimes just having that sort of career development plan and thinking through what is it I really want, what is it, what is my definition of success, and building a bit of a brand and a plan around that. But I think what I often see, and especially with the clients I work with, is, for whatever reason, whether it's economic requirements and hardships, they've been sort of forced to take sort of the first role that they found. Sometimes it's even sort of settlement agencies, sort of, as I mentioned before, pushing them to take the role. But what happens over time when you have, anyone who isn't utilizing their skills or underemployed, you lose your confidence. And I always say, when you're in environments like that, you lose pieces of yourself. And I think that is what we really sort of need to think about, is how are we supporting newcomers once they're here? And not just, in the first 3 months. We know these things take time. What are the programs there to sort of support people, a year or 2 years out? And even when we think of it from sort of an entrepreneurship program, I think it's also just helping people understand what are the different pathways to entrepreneurship. It may not be starting your business now. It may be also sort of looking at, 3 years, 5 years, and building that plan. But so a lot of sort of different things sort of stopping people, but I think a lot of it just comes down to, quite often sort of that advocacy and the tools that people need to essentially sort of promote themselves and find opportunities.
I think the key is the term career. I think people need career in their lives. Often the policies are focused on creating jobs, and there's a stark difference between the two, and it's often overlooked. So just quickly, two more questions that I have is, what can the federal, provincial, local governments do to help innovator and newcomers to succeed? Of course, innovator newcomers can come through entrepreneur programs like a startup visa, or they can be like myself, as a student, with a different journey, and as a grad student, and then start a startup and a business. But what can the different levels of government do to support uh, innovator newcomers?
I mean, I think, Said, you had mentioned this before, but I think it really kind of piqued my interest that there isn't actually, other than the startup visa program, now we don't have a clear, um, all-encompassing federal path for immigrant entrepreneurs. So, the Ontario provincial nominee program used to have an entrepreneur stream, which has now been paused since last year. The self-employed category is restricted to people in the cultural and athletic sectors. So it's always struck me as odd that there isn't a kind of more of a all-encompassing pathway for individuals to apply as an entrepreneur. And then, like you said, also have some really key markers and milestones that they have to meet in order to qualify under that program. Like, I think that's such a great idea to, potentially tie your immigration status to markers maybe after you get here as well, so that there's an initial eligibility requirement, but then after you come, there's responsibilities that people have to meet in order to maybe extend their visa or obtain their permanent resident status, which is actually very similar to how the US immigration program works. There's a lot of different hurdles you have to meet even after you get your initial visa. And I think ultimately, like, also coming back to what Michael said, it's, really just setting people up for that success by helping them, develop all the skills that they need to succeed under these programs.
Michael, do you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm definitely in agreement there, and I think we need some sort of thoughtful program that is going to provide the support both sort of before entrepreneurs come as well as when they're here as well. And I think a lot of that is also thinking through from partners. How can we partner with funders? And really come up with sort of a comprehensive program that addresses a lot of the issues that we spoke about as well. And then a program as well that is sort of tied to sort of the local needs that we see sort of across the country. But I think it's very much sort of thinking through again, what are the key objectives and how can we sort of build a program that addresses the needs both from an innovation perspective, but also some of the individual needs of entrepreneurs moving here, so that entrepreneurship isn't viewed as, that last resort if I don't find a job, but we're actually making it appealing for people, and we're showing them the path. I think that's the other thing is where we talk about, customer experience journeys, and I'm not sure if we've really truly mapped out what that immigrant entrepreneur journey looks like or what it could look like, and what we'd need to support that.
I think I want to just touch a little bit on what Adrian, because we're running out of time, mentioned. I think we need to have a proper business immigration strategy, one that is diverse and really is tailored to the different profiles of immigrant entrepreneurs. And without that, Rolodex of programs, often the people are redirected, and that creates situations where it's not really good for the program, it's not good for the outcome, it's not good for the country, and it really doesn't achieve the goals of the program. So I think that could be a very good suggestion. I want to skip the last question because I want to ask a question from the audience. I think it's very much in line with why I am basically doing these talks, and super thankful to both of you for taking the time. But is there a way that individuals and small groups can influence Canada's evolving immigration policies? And Adrian,
Yeah, so actually, the government often creates surveys where anyone can provide their opinion on Canadian immigration policy. So the IRCC's website, if you go to IRCC surveys, then they are often posting to ask for feedback on potentially new programs or programs that have been developed. And I can tell you, having worked at IRCC, that feedback is absolutely taken into account. So, whether it's implemented in a particular program or policy it will depend on what the feedback is, of course, but that feedback is reviewed. Like even for us, I litigate a lot. I challenge a lot of immigration decisions that have been refused in the past. And when I go to a court hearing, I get a survey about what the experience was of my client and me during and after the hearing. And when we put in feedback, it's just a standard email that you get. When we put in that feedback, it goes all the way up to the deputy chairperson, who opens her day by reading the feedback of what my client's experience was like at the hearing. And so, you get these kind of standard tell us your opinion or complete this survey. And it actually is looked at by policymakers and decision makers. So it's a great way to give feedback on exactly what Saeed and I are talking about, which is, developing a program for immigrant entrepreneurs and business people.
Well, that's a very good insight. I think and that's another maybe cultural, because maybe it's very important to mention and talk and educate newcomers, immigrants, that they have rights, and their feedback is, I guess, not just a placeholder. Actually, if they take the time and they share their thoughts, it's actually being looked at. So that's great insight. Thank you so much, Adrian. Any last thoughts from the two of you? I have a question from the comment section that we can probably I'll reach out to you, and then I get the answers, and then I would revert back, as I'm very mindful of your time. But any last minute thoughts, and apologies, we went a little bit over the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's having more of these conversations. And when we talk about, these policy questions, individually, we don't necessarily have all the answers. But I think the more we can bring people together to talk about some of these challenges and have, an open, honest discussion about these and think through from a solution perspective, what makes sense, that's sort of part of the innovation process. So I know we're talking about innovation today. Part of innovation involves vulnerability. It involves trying different things. It involves recognizing that we're going to try things that may not work. But I think sort of bringing a lot of that to these discussions, and just so thankful, Saeed, that you sort of created this forum to sort of talk about some of these, and just seeing sort of the number of people that signed up. I think people are really looking for more of these and opportunities to sort of get ideas and share these thoughts. And who knows what this can lead to sort of from a policy perspective down the road. But I think this is sort of a great start to looking at the different avenues of influencing the change that we know we need.
Thank you. Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, I again also just want to thank you for this discussion. And I think, when we're also looking at change and solutions, like a great way for individuals to make their mark on, future immigration policy and entrepreneur policy for newcomers is obviously to get into positions of decision making where you are in government, or you are leading organizations that are consulting with the government, so that the voices of people who have actually gone through the experience are really heard loud and clear. Because like we mentioned, that lived experience, I think, wasn't as valued as it was in the past. And I think now people are realizing, understanding, if you want to call it the customer experience or the journey that people go through, is so valued. And I think there is such an appetite for people in positions of decision making to hear it. So just to encourage people to, like you said, really make their voices heard.
I can't thank you both enough for taking your valuable time and sharing with us your insights. I want to end on a positive note and try to always exemplify myself. I came Canada. I'm also an immigrant entrepreneur. I got support from a lot of different people, and always have been like super helpful to me. And and I just try to, part of my passion and my mission is to try to recreate those opportunities for people that, like me, they are thinking, oh, like I don't want to do a corporate job. I want to create my own business, but can I really do that? And the short answer is yes. And I encourage everyone to it's not going to be easy. It's going to be so many challenges. It's not going to be an easy path, but I think the key is what Adrian mentioned. If you're passionate about something and you put your energy behind it, it's a very much an individualized journey. But in Canada, part of the Canadian entrepreneurship brand is that everybody is going to be supportive. So all you have to do is you have to reach out from a humble perspective, and from a vulnerable perspective, and ask for help. And next thing you know, you like, not everybody would offer their hand, but you will have an army of people around you that they go above and beyond and out of their way to help you achieve your goals. So again, thank you both of you. I was really enjoyed this conversation. I'm proud to have hosted you, and I thank all the audience that joined us on different platforms. And I really hope that to continue these conversations. If you have any ideas or topics that you would like us to discuss, please DM me, message me. Of course, we have the LinkedIn profile of the two esteemed speakers. You can add them on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or from them, you can ask them. Again, thank you so much for your time, and until the next one. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye.